In today's video, we have all the latest trade talk leading up to the draft regarding players like Alex Debrincat and Pierre-Luc Dubois. We also have some other trade rumors regarding the New Jersey Devils and the Boston Bruins, some UFA rumors around Jonathan Toews and Connor Brown, some coaching updates from around the league, and a signing in Boston. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news and rumors to talk about today. Let's kick things off with a few news and notes from around the league, including a signing with the Boston Bruins. They've signed one of their minor league prospect goaltenders, Brendan Bussi. He gets a one-year, two-way contract to remain in the organization. He was a pretty good goaltender for them at the American Hockey League level, and he'll get another opportunity to continue with that and be a call-up option for them at the NHL level should they get to that point of needing somebody. Of course, the Bruins goaltending situation is going to be interesting to see what they do. They're, of course, a team which we're going to talk about later in the video as well, on very limited cap space. Jeremy Swayman needs a new contract. Some speculation about Linus Ullmark being moved, although that's far from guaranteed. I mean, they would be hard-pressed to take this very carefully here, but certainly going to be interesting to see what they do. The goaltending situation in Boston is certainly far from clear, but mostly just due to salary cap implications. Some coaching notes from around the league. It looks as though former Vancouver Canuck head coach Travis Green is working his way back to the NHL. He appears to be joining the New Jersey Devils as an assistant coach who will replace Andrew Brunette, of course, who moved on to become the head coach in Nashville. Apparently, Green had also interviewed for some head coaching roles around the NHL, including the Calgary Flames, a few others, and he also spoke to the Toronto Maple Leafs, I guess, about their opening for an assistant coach. Had options in all cases, and opted to go to the Devils organization. Sounds like Calgary and Toronto were both willing to entertain the possibility of bringing him on as an assistant, but the Devils were as well, of course, and that's what he ended up choosing to do. Speaking of the Maple Leafs' vacant assistant coaching role, which was vacated by new Capitals head coach Spencer Carberry, some other names that are reportedly in the mix that they're talking to here include Todd Nelson. Mitch Love, of course, in Calgary, has the connection to Brad Treliving. Obviously, Mitch Love is the AHL head coach for the Calgary Wranglers and missed out on becoming the NHL head coach of the Calgary Flames, with new GM Craig Conroy saying he felt he needed to get a little bit more NHL experience, maybe as an assistant first before getting a head coaching gig. So there's an opportunity for him. Another name to watch as well, apparently, is Carl Taylor, the head coach for the Milwaukee American Hockey League team, which is the Predators affiliate. And just a name that not that's been mentioned by NHL insiders, but just personally that I know I think would be a great fit, especially where Carberry was the power play and offensive coach, worked with the forwards. I wonder about Bruce Boudreau. I mean, I do wonder. I mean, he's one of the most experienced coaches in the game. We've seen what he just coached in Vancouver most recently, not that long ago. Still seems to have a very big passion for coaching and for the game of hockey. Obviously, was a long time Leaf fan when he was in his younger years. It sounds like to me I think he would jump at an opportunity to coach in Toronto, even if it's not the head coaching job. So I'll be curious to see if they give him any kind of consideration or whatnot. But there's a variety of names that they're looking at in that regards. Speaking of the Leafs, there's also this rumor that I've seen. I think it started with maybe dailyfaceoff.com. Frank Saravalli putting it out on his list of potential buyout candidates, and there's a lot of other people that are now talking about it as defenseman TJ Brodie maybe being a buyout candidate here for the Leafs. Now, I think we're all very much in agreement that if the Leafs are probably going to do what they can to move on from Matt Murray. Matt Murray would be obviously a trade candidate first if they can, take that contract and move it by attaching something else to it, like they did with Peter Mrazek the year before. Then that's probably option one, so they can move the full cap hit. Of course, it really boils down to what they need to attach to it. If not, they'll exercise the buyout. I think that one's a little bit more certain. But again, if they can trade him first, then they'll do that depending on the price. TJ Brodie has a year left at $5 million. Now, the reason I think people are talking about this is more to do with the fact that I think it's probably fair to give Brodie a little bit of a hard time, saying that his play in the playoffs did decline some. His defensive play wasn't as strong as it has been. So I think it's fair to say there's a bit of a decline going on with his game. But at the same time, it's $5 million. The way the cap works with his contract, if they bought him out, they would actually get the full credit back of the $5 million cap hit, and they would have a $2.5 million cap hit in 2 years from now. So they'd get $5 million in salary cap space, and they would obviously wipe out Brodie from the roster. So having an extra $5 million in cap space, that sounds pretty good. However, TJ Brodie, say what you want about him, he is one of your better, probably your top two defensively responsible defensemen on your roster. If you take him out, are you confident and comfortable that you can go and replace him in a thin UFA market and get a better value that's good, somebody who's going to be better than Brodie that you can maybe pay less money to? I don't really think that you can. I mean, for one, the free agent market is thin, so I don't really think there's much out there on the D market that you're going to pay under $5 million, so that you can get a 4.5 or 4 or 3.5, anything along those lines that's going to do a better job than Brodie. So as much as it's appealing to have the space, you got to remember that you have to have a player to utilize that space that's going to do the job for you. And what's the point of doing it if you're not certain you can upgrade the position? And then you have dead cap money in 2 years from now. Sure, the cap should go up more then, but you want to be able to take advantage of that. So to me, I don't really see a buyout being likely. Now, the other thing here as well is that TJ Brodie, of course, very familiar and connected to new GM Brad Treliving. They're both in the Flames organization for a long time. So it's somebody that Treliving knows extremely well, along with Mark Giordano. I just don't see it happening myself. Like, really, like I said, is it fair to give Brodie some, a little bit of heck or criticize him a bit for his game in the playoffs? Sure. Doesn't mean he needs to go, though. Like, he can still play a different role for the team, and has one more year of $5 million. I would rather have that $5 million cap space available the following season when he's a UFA, and instead of having a $2.5 million cap hit, when you're looking at the UFA market saying, well, who are you going to replace him with? That's always a big question. So to me, I understand some of the logic, but at the same time, I don't, and I don't see it happening. If the Leafs announce they're buying out Brodie, I truly would be surprised. So we'll see where that goes, but I don't expect anything to come from it. I just want to mention it because it's been getting a lot of attention on social media. On the UFA rumor front, there is some talk that the Edmonton Oilers are showing some interest in a couple of veteran forwards, one being former Chicago Blackhawks captain Jonathan Toews, and the other being Connor Brown. Of course, Connor Brown has been linked to the Oilers, it feels like, forever, and a lot of that's to do with the fact that he played junior hockey with Connor McDavid. I mean, that's really the reasons that I think that you've had that connection. When he was getting towards the end of his time with the Leafs were getting to a point where they really couldn't afford him anymore, and they were going to trade him, and he ended up getting traded to Ottawa, and that big deal was had, there's a lot of players in that trade between the Leafs and Senators that off-season, but before he went to Ottawa, there was talk the Oilers were interested. Before his time was up in Ottawa, there was rumors that maybe the Oilers were going to look to try to acquire Connor Brown. Now he's a UFA, and he can go wherever he wants, so would it be appealing interest from him to go to the Oilers? Maybe. I'm not really sure. But the thing is he's coming off a major injury where he only played a few games last year. He can probably get a short-term cheap deal just for a year and then kind of reprove himself, show he's healthy and can still play, and then get extended afterwards. So wouldn't be shocking if Edmonton was in on him. At the same time, I wouldn't be shocked if he went back to Ottawa either. They are going to need somebody for the similar role. And he did mention recently, I heard an interview with him on a podcast saying that the best thing that ever happened to him was for him to go to the Senators because he was able to get a bigger role. And it really, with where the team is at, wouldn't be shocking. I don't know if the interest is there mutually on either side, but either way, Jonathan Toews going to Edmonton, certainly intriguing character player who can be like a third-line guy. Obviously, to make the math work, either of these guys, though, the hope would be that they can get a veteran player who brings good character, good work ethic, can contribute offensively, and they can sign for cheap. That's the objective here from Ken Holland. If the price ends up being too high, then they're not going to be able to get either player. So we'll see where that goes, but definite interest from Edmonton on both of those unrestricted free agent players. As I mentioned as well, a lot of other news and notes from around the league, most of which comes from the 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman, but some of which is also from other sources, including I see a lot of chatter. This is just really a social media thing. Pierre-Luc Dubois is getting a lot of attention after this past weekend. There's a lot of NHL players gathered in Montreal. Of course, lots of Montreal Canadian players still kind of kicking around, and some that came back to the city for the Canadian Grand Prix F1 event this past weekend. There was all kinds of players, a lot of them posting photos on Instagram or Twitter, and it's getting a lot of attention. Pierre-Luc Dubois, of course, was spotted in some pictures with Montreal Canadiens forward Cole Caulfield. Obviously, there were some other Habs around, all kinds of players there. I seen Paul Byron, Carey Price, I'm pretty sure Carey Price was there. PK Subban, of course, former Montreal Canadian, was there as well. So a lot of people are saying, obviously, the Dubois kind of being wooed to come to Montreal, which, of course, isn't entirely all his doing. But if he wants to be difficult in negotiations, he can tell the Jets that Montreal is the only team he'd sign an extension with. If he really wants to get down to it, that's how he can gain leverage. And if the Habs are willing to trade for him, great. And if not, well, I'm not sure what happens at that point. But at the end of the day, Dubois, is obviously friends with a lot of players around the league. And the other thing, too, I caution all of the speculation. Not to say that he won't end up in Montreal. He very well could. But he does live in that area. That is where he's from. It's not shocking to see Pierre-Luc Dubois popping up in Montreal in the offseason. And I'll also caution, there was all kinds of other NHL players around. A lot of other friends of Cole Caulfield were there. He was also spotted with former teammates from the U.S. team, Jack Hughes and Trevor Zegras. They were both there. They also were in a bigger group with, like I said, Subban and Dubois and a few other NHL guys around. Like I said, all kinds of current and former Habs were present there, and some other NHL people were certainly around for the event too. So, is it something that's going on that maybe the Habs players are trying to convince him to come to Montreal? Maybe. Does he want to go there? I have no doubt that based on his comments before and his agent and everything we've heard, that he absolutely does. Does this mean that it's closer to a Montreal trade for Dubois? I really don't think so. But at the end of the day, we're not that far from the draft. If it is going to happen, to me, that makes the most sense where it's going to happen. And we'll see what happens. But Dubois is in Montreal, hanging out with Habs players, getting lots of attentions, even though I think it's apropos of absolutely nothing. Now, on to some other NHL trade talk. The Boston Bruins are a team I want to touch on today. Certainly a team that's very much really hard up for salary cap space. They have about $5 million in cap space. This, of course, means that they don't have Bergeron or Krejci. We don't know if they're coming back. So if they don't come back, they got to replace them. And if they do come back, they got to figure out a way to pay them. So either way, those are two big holes in the lineup. You've got Jeremy Swayman with no contract, and they're not the only ones. There's a few other spots on the roster that need to be filled in too. So certainly this team needs some cap flexibility in the worst way. Like I said earlier, there's lots of talk. Some people think Linus Ullmark is going to be the cap casualty here. But to me, you have two good goaltenders that get along famously. I'm not really so sure that's still going to be the way we want to go here. Ullmark had a fantastic regular season. Yes, his playoffs could have been better. Maybe they should have turned to Swayman a little sooner in the series. You can debate that all day long, but I don't really think Linus Ullmark is your big problem here. To me, trading him is very, risky. So I'm not really sure that they're going to do that. To me, a player that makes a lot more sense is a player like Taylor Hall. Now, another way to get more cap space as well is to do a buyout on Mike Riley. That's fully expected. He's got 1 year left on his contract. He mostly played in the minors last year. To me, a Mike Riley buyout, if they can't find a trade that makes sense for them, is going to happen. They'll get a little extra cap space. They can get that number from $5 million closer to $7 million. Gets them a little extra breathing room. But still, I still think the odds of a Taylor Hall trade or a Jake DeBrusk trade is very likely. I think they would trade Hall before DeBrusk if they can find the right deal, of course. I think they have to be in a situation where they can trade for future assets if they can, or a player on an ELC or something like that, because they, like I said, they can't take salary back. They just don't have the space. And Taylor Hall's been a nice player for them. It has nothing to do with the fact that they don't like him or are unhappy with his contract. It's just, if you look at the roster and say, based on value for what they're getting, they're not trading Brad Marchand, they're not trading David Pastrnak. Pavel Zacha fits in really well. Hey, Jake DeBrusk had a nice breakout season last year. I don't see how it makes sense to move him. They need to find a way to get a centerman. Maybe Hall is that player. To me, he's a player you can live without. I think that's what makes sense to me. I think a team like the Avalanche, for example, who are going to be without Landeskog all year, they're going to have that room on their cap, even if it's through LTIR. So that's a team to watch. Maybe his hometown in Calgary might want to look into it as well. I know Craig Conroy's certainly going to be making some moves. They have a lot of players that are pending UFAs that may be dealt out. That could be, obviously create room to come in. I know the Bruins would also really like to keep Tyler Bertuzzi. And if they're going to have any chance to do that, they need to free up some space. And at the end of the day, if they'd rather have Bertuzzi than Hall, then he's got to go. Would they rather have Bertuzzi over DeBrusk? I don't know. I mean, Bertuzzi was a good fit there, but DeBrusk was a really solid player for the last year too. So I think Hall would be the more likely one to go. And like I said, teams like Calgary, Colorado, maybe a team like Dallas might be looking into a few things. Obviously, cap space is going to play a role here. Hall doesn't have a ton of term. He's not making a ton of money. So it's not like it's an impossible contract to trade. So to me, that's a real possibility that he can move. There's already been word in the last few days from the Elliotte Friedman in his podcast talking about New Jersey likely getting a deal done for Yegor Sharangovich. He's likely going to be traded. After signing Jesper Bratt, they want to get Timo Meier done. I know they want to extend Dawson Mercer long term. And is this kind of boxing him out of having a real solid spot in the lineup? He's a pretty decent middle six player who can probably give you most teams, 20, maybe 25 goals. You never know. He's still young. He could blossom to even being a more of a point producer. But I think early on in the next couple of years for him to be a consistent 20 goal guy is not out of the reach of possibilities at all. And he's a player who would come fairly cheap, at least on a short-term basis until he earns more money. But the Devils are certainly looking to move him, except with all the other guys that have kind of just moved ahead of him in their lineup and some of the other prospects that are coming behind him. He just kind of, ran out of a spot for him, so to speak. It's nothing to do with anything else. And he's very much going to generate a lot of interest. There's no doubt. A cheap player who can get you 20 goals, a lot of teams are going to take a long look at that and certainly, consider it. And I know Freeman was reported that there's all kinds of teams interested already. So don't be surprised if he's a player traded either at or before the draft. And the other big thing I want to talk about as well is St. Louis. St. Louis could be a good landing spot for a few different players, including Alex Debrincat or Clayton Keller. Either way, even if it's not them, I expect Doug Armstrong and the Blues to be very active. I know Elliotte Friedman made a point to mention them in the latest podcast that came out today, talking about how he does expect them to be a very busy team. Sounds like they're a team that's kind of, made it known that they're willing to trade their first-round picks. They have 3 of them. I wouldn't be shocked if they traded 1 or 2. They'd probably keep one of them, the highest one anyway. They've also made it clear that they're not bringing back the status quo. They're definitely making changes, and a scoring winger is definitely somebody that they would have their eyes on. I mean, look at what they dealt at the deadline. Tarasenko's not coming back. They moved on from Ryan O'Reilly, although there's some think that there's a possibility O'Reilly goes back through free agency, which wouldn't be a complete shocker, but I'm not convinced he's going to either. Boils down to money at the end of the day. Of course, Friedman mentions the fact, of course, that Clayton Keller and his uncertainty in Arizona after he and his agent had a lot of concerns when the arena deal fell through. A lot of talk that he wanted more clarity on the future and on the plans. What's the plan for the arena? And the agents that represent him didn't push too hard. But to me, if they don't get clarity here over the summer, it wouldn't be shocking if he does ask for a trade. And obviously, he's a St. Louis player, born and raised. So, it would make a lot of sense that they would have the assets to acquire him. Now, the same thing goes for Alex Debrincat, though. Now, he's not from St. Louis, but still would be the type of player that the Blues are absolutely looking for. They have a combination of the assets that would be required to get it done. They could offer Ottawa either a first-round pick and a prospect. They could offer them 2 first-round picks. Maybe it's a combination of picks. Maybe it's a pick and a young player. They have those interesting players and picks that would probably pique Ottawa's eyes to make this kind of deal happen. Now, would Ottawa prefer a legit NHL player coming back in the deal to replace Debrincat? I think they probably would, but it's proven by talking this through and listening to enough NHL reporters. That's going to be very, very, very difficult to do. I think more than likely, if they're going to get a player to be in their lineup, they're either going to move Debrincat for futures and use that space that they're not paying him to go into free agency and find a good player, maybe more of a, instead of an $8-9 million player, maybe a $5 to $6 million player. Maybe it's maybe they go after a Tyler Bertuzzi if he's there, or a Michael Bunting, or one of those guys, can give you 60 points and 25 goals, something along those lines. Or perhaps they take the future assets acquired in the trade and flip them to another team, maybe like Arizona for Clayton Keller. I mean, as much as Keller's from St. Louis, I think Ottawa also makes a lot of sense for him. A lot of young American-born players that he would have played with growing up, including, I'm sure his family is quite familiar with the Tkachuks, being from St. Louis. Again, I think he'd be comfortable in that kind of situation too. So obviously, and he comes with a long-term contract, which is nice at the same time. So either way, players like Debrincat and Keller are going to get a lot of attention. There's no doubt. I think St. Louis will be a team to watch when it comes to those guys, or even a Travis Konechny from Philly, another name, a similar type of player. They all have a little bit of a different game, of course, between Keller, Debrincat, Konechny. They're all going to give you a little bit different production. They're all going to play a little bit of a different way, but at the end of the day, they're all scoring wingers, which is what they're looking for here. So expect the Blues to be busy and figure out a way to get their hands on one of those types of players that are available around the NHL. That's all your news and notes for today. Let me know your thoughts and everything down in the comments. We'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.